Dr. Harper, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I had the I feel incredibly grateful to have read your wonderful book, Shavasana Sun.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, it it was a project that I did. It was the second project actually that I did while our son was kind of growing up. He's 2.5 now, and I would write them at night while he was sleeping. And it just kind of became this thing that I really enjoyed doing, and I just continue to enjoy doing. And so
Oh,
it's something that I do in my free time, and I love it.
oh, it's beautiful. I think what's so wonderful is I'm a mama of two too. Um, is that it just explains mindfulness and the power of affirmations in this wonderful way that kiddos really get.
Yeah. I want it to really be simple, right? So I know, it's easy to start at a really basic level, right? So if you have a child who everybody knows how to breathe, right? That is a basic life necessity, right? So teaching them some of those bigger concepts is a little bit more difficult. So I really wanted to keep it very simple, very easy to follow, fun. And so immediately I shifted to some of the animals. Ooh, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
There we go. Okay, sorry, I was breaking up a little bit. Um, so I immediately started to shift to some animals, and I don't remember if we talked about this a little bit, but a lot of the people in my family have made little appearances within the book. Um,
Oh,
so
beautiful.
yeah, yeah. So my husband and my son are in the back, that very back page. Um, a lot of my family members' names are in there. So it's a running joke within our family, but I had to call my grandma before I named the pig after her. I
Oh, that's
had to give
beautiful.
her a quick little phone call and let her know. And she kind of laughed it off. But yeah, so there's a couple different family members within the book, and I think that really helped me sort of bring it to fruition and take that second book and make it even better than the first one and even more exciting.
Gorgeous. So, what was the inspiration behind mindfulness in particular?
Yeah. Um, so I have to go back a little bit. So I was in college at the time, and they offered a mindfulness course. Now, as a college student, my first thought wasn't, "I'm gonna keep doing this." My first thought was, "It's 9:30 in the morning, and I get to sleep in the back row." Right?
Totally, totally.
Yes. And so I started attending the courses, and eventually it got to the point where I was like, you know what? I think I really need to just kind of see where this goes, right? I need to take it and see what this has to offer. And so after that, I took four more. And I really loved it. And it just felt, I describe it the way that I use it for myself is there's like a tornado around you, but that doesn't mean you have to respond, right? So all of these things can be going on around you in life, but it doesn't always mean you have to respond. And that was for me one of the biggest takeaways that I used for that. And so it was just this incredible journey that I found myself on. And I saw a need within my own clients, right, of this lack of basic coping skills within adults. And I said, how can I give to these children? Like, I really wanted to work with kids. And I said, how can I give back to these kids? And how can I show them that some of these basic techniques you can use, right? Like, I have clients every day who come in and say, I have test anxiety, or, I feel anxious all the time, but don't have the basic breath work and mindfulness techniques to adapt.
hmm hmm Absolutely. So, in writing Shavasana Sun, it's going, how do we give these to kiddos when they're much younger?
Yeah. And just saying, hey, you know what? You're going to use these potentially later in life. Now it's cute and it's fun and it's all of those things, right? But later in life, you're going to know how to do that, right? And our 2.5 year old, he thinks it's like funny now. But if I ask him, I'll say, what do we do when we're frustrated? And he starts taking these big, deep breaths, right? And he thinks it's cute and it's fun. But I'm teaching him, right, that if you're mad or if you're upset, right, let's stop and take a deep breath first, right? And that's always where we go first.
Mm.
It's never, and I know, I get it. Parenting is hard. Parenting is not an easy task, right? But it's taking that extra second, right? And even as a parent, um, sitting there and not immediately responding, right? You see your child screaming and crying and kicking and all of those things, right? And you want to do something about it, but that's not always the best response because you might respond out of anger or you might say something you don't mean,
Mm. Mm.
but that sticks with your child. You know,
Absolutely.
as a two and a
Absolutely.
half year old, he's repeating everything we say all the time, and he never lets us forget it.
Hmm. And Taylor, I think when if we had an entire world that just slowed down that thought process a little bit, I think we would live in a very different world.
Completely, completely, right? If you used some of the techniques as an adult, right, and you just said, hey, I don't always need to respond. Hey, I don't always need to jump to the next conclusion, right? And one of the things that people do a lot of times is they listen to respond. They don't listen to actually listen to what someone else is saying. And that's one of the biggest problems is we're always listening to give feedback. But maybe that person didn't even want feedback, right? Maybe they just wanted someone to hear them.
Hmm.
And I think that's the hardest part is we're constantly in this world where we feel like we always have to respond and we always have to give the right answer, right? And we're always trying to level up and do the next best thing. But a lot of times we don't really take the time to slow down. And that's why we're seeing some of the things we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, right? Um, Especially in teenagers and young adults. We're seeing that extreme need for perfectionism.
Hmm. Hmm. 100%. I often say that as a culture, we just don't listen. It's not ingrained in us from very young.
Yeah.
Whereas I agree with you that if we slow down and we go, what is the message behind what this person is actually saying? Everything shifts for us. So when your 7-year-old yells at you, I hate you, if we're able to slow that down and go, what is she actually communicating to me underneath? The conversation shifts dramatically from go to your room to why is she struggling right now because I've taken that pause.
Yeah. Yeah. And something we do in our own lives, timeout doesn't exist in our house.
Mm-hmm.
And I know potentially a little, controversial, but I hope some people are waking up to it as well. It doesn't exist in our house because I'm not going to allow my child to sit with the heavy thoughts of life alone, right? When they're upset, when they're frustrated, right? When they don't know how to respond, the last thing I want to do is put them in a corner and say, go figure it out yourself,
Absolutely,
right?
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
in our house we're on the same page. In our house there are no timeouts either, and I think a big part of that too is when we look at children who have to hold those heavy thoughts who are put in a timeout. Very often their prefrontal cortex isn't even online enough yet for them
Hmm.
to be able to sit there and reflect and go, next time I won't take my sister's toy. We're putting kids in a corner to do something that isn't developmentally appropriate at all.
Yeah. They
Yeah.
will never do anything different because they're not capable of being at that level yet. They're not capable of, their brain isn't ready for that, right?
Hmm.
And so you're trying to force them to grow up, right? But they're never going to meet it. And so that's where we see some of that, anxiety, that perfectionism. It starts really, really young, right? Because you're trying to force your child to constantly grow up and grow up and grow up and grow up. And eventually they look back and they're like, when did I have time to be a kid? When did I have time to sort of do some of these things, right? And I think that's why you're seeing a culture of people who are homeschooling their children, who are now, as they call it, unschooling their children, right? Because they're seeing the benefits of just allowing a child to be a child.
The beauty of play, that
Yeah.
thing called play. I heard this beautiful quote the other day that said, really, our free time has been replaced with screen time. There is no space for kids to explore, to build a fort, to sit by
Hmm.
the creek anymore. All of that's disappearing so quickly. And really, that's where your books slows us all down and says, let's take this light-hearted walk around the farm and learn some really, really important life skill techniques.
Yeah, yeah, and that's truly what I wanted it to be, right? Like my intention is to get it in the hands of as many kids as possible, not because I want to, hit any sort of marker, but because I truly want kids to be able to take that and say, okay, how can I use this in my real life, right? Or how can I find fun in this, right? And make it something that I can use later on more intentionally, right? Because at this age, it might not seem like something that's important, right? But later on, they're going to be like, oh yeah, like that's so ingrained in my brain that that's now a part of who I am, right?
Yes.
And so
What do
instead of falling to anger, we're going to fall into, let's take a deep breath, let's take a step back, right? And of course, when you're in schools and things like that, it's always, I think I always make probably the teachers kind of mad because no one's listening and it's super chaotic and everyone's screaming and yelling. But I know that they're going to take away from that, like, oh, I had so much fun, right?
Yes.
And that's what I want them to take away from it. Like, I had so much fun. And then they use that later on, right?
Mhm.
And maybe say, oh, I remember that. Or like, oh, that sort of stuck with me. And that's what I hope happens, is that it sticks with enough kids that we see a potentially new generation of children, even if they're not reading my book specifically, right? A new generation of kids who are able to adapt to their surroundings and can express their emotions appropriately while being able to say, hey, just because I have an emotion or just because I have a thought doesn't mean I need to respond to it.
Huge, 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 huge. I know too, Taylor, that the research right now shows us that, for example, anger management strategies, children are highly unlikely to use those strategies when they're angry because
Mm-hmm.
they don't have the resources. But what I'm hearing you say today is when we start introducing techniques like mindfulness, slowing down, affirmations, we're going to talk about affirmations shortly,
Yeah.
that if we introduce it from a very young age in playful, light-hearted ways, and we continue to integrate it into their lifestyle, it then becomes a natural response to stress in their world versus a once-off lesson that we might have in a social emotional learning curriculum, as an example.
Yeah, yeah. So even with affirmations, right, and I can talk about that a little bit. Um, Affirmations are the exact same way, right? So if you repeat something to yourself enough, right, you are literally creating new neural pathways in your brain that are shifting the way that you think, right? And that's the only difference, right? Is are you going to respond to something in anger or are you going to take that step back and say, hey, I really need to evaluate how I'm feeling right now, right? And it's these little tiny day-to-day things, right? Like I said with our toddler, it's, what do you do when you're frustrated, right? And he starts taking these deep breaths and he smiles and it's a whole thing, right? And it's super cute. But one day he's going to remember that because we've talked about it so many times that he's going to remember that moment, right? And a lot of times if it's funny because um, he doesn't tolerate any sort of like escalation of voices at all, like zero tolerance for it. Um, and even sometimes, like, my husband will not be raising his voice in any way, shape, or form, and he will just be like, time out, time out. And he comes like running around the corner. And he's just so good at doing that because we've taught him so young that, like, there's no reason to raise your voice. There's no reason to be upset, right? You can be upset, but that doesn't mean you need to take it out on other people.
Mm-hmm.
And affirmations are truly the same exact way, right? It's like, are you going to think negative things or positive things? Either way, you're going to think something. So you might as well boost your own self esteem and your own ego by thinking those positive things. Like,
So, Taylor,
why think negative?
yeah, if we have moms and dads and grandmas listening in today and they're thinking about a particular 3 or 4-year-old whose behaviors they're struggling with, where do they even start in terms of mindfulness and affirmations?
Yeah. So the first thing I would tell them is show your child unconditional love. And a lot of times that's what I see is the first thing is love is given and taken so freely, right? And with a child, it does not matter what sort of mood they're in, you have to show unconditional love. And I know that's really hard to do, right? I get it. A perfect example the other night, our toddler didn't want to eat, he didn't want to participate, and he was just like throwing food. It was chaotic, right? And we're just trying to eat dinner. So I took him in our other room and I sat there, and he completely had a tantrum for about 10 minutes, give or take. And I sat next to him, right? I didn't touch him. I didn't engage with him. I didn't try to force him to feel better, right? I just said, I love you so much, and that's not going to change, right? And when he was ready, And this is another thing that we've worked on. When he was ready, I said, when you're ready, you can come talk to me, right? You can come sit in my lap and we can talk. And eventually, he stopped crying. He picked himself up off the floor. He came and sat in my lap and we talked about it, right? We had a good, productive conversation. I know people are probably saying, how are you doing that with a 2.5-year-old, right? But it's every day. It's work. It's work, right? So if you have that child who's 3, 4, right, who's throwing these big tantrums and having these big feelings, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with having feelings, right? It's just you can't create more chaos. You're the adult, right? So I would recommend that they start and look from their own perspective. How are you responding to things, right? Your child sees that every day. So how are you responding? And then evaluate, should I be doing better? Could I be doing better? Right? And I'm not a perfect parent by any means, by any means, right? But the point of all of it is that I try every single day to be better, right? And so I think that's the biggest thing is showing that child grace and unconditional love because they don't know how to work through those emotions yet. They haven't had, 20, 30, 40 years to figure it out. They've had 4.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And being the calm for them in those moments.
Yeah, completely.
So we start with anchoring ourselves and saying, how am I perhaps exacerbating the situation or how am I calming the situation?
Mm-hmm.
We wait for them. And then those mindfulness and affirmation techniques, where do they fit into all of this?
Yeah, so those are the things that we do every day to sort of mediate some of these bigger feelings, right? So it doesn't escalate to that point of, they're throwing a 25-minute tantrum. And because once you're in that state, right, once your child is in that state of having a tantrum, there's nothing that you're going to do to change that, right? They are in that fight or flight mode. And until they're ready to calm down, mainly you're going to make it worse, right? Because they can't regulate their own emotions. So the affirmations and the mindfulness, right? All of those things come together to help your child better understand their own feelings and their own emotions. So that way we don't see as many big blow-ups, right? Like our son's blow-ups are few and far between, right? And again, he's a kid. He's totally going to do it. And I'm A-okay with that, right? All feelings are welcome in our house. All of them, right? Embrace them. Let me show you how to engage with them, right? And I think that's the biggest thing is using those mindfulness techniques to say, okay, I'm feeling upset. How can I regulate myself before it gets to that next level, right? And also telling yourself these really great things, right? Affirmations are a way to tell yourself consistently all of these really, really good things, right? Because a lot of times as parents, we may come across as harsh or unloving, right? And again, that comes back to unconditional love, right? But a lot of times the first thing we take away is like, you can't do this if this, right? Or I'm not going to do this if this, right? And then your child's going to get more upset, right? So it's a whole package. It's a whole deal. And it's something that I've learned along the way, right? And something that I still continue to work with. And I see a lot of kids, a lot of teenagers, a lot of young adults who are still processing through some of these things. So I think it's really important to kind of have the whole bigger picture just aside from this book.
I think I agree 100% with you. And I think for so many of us, how we initially parent our child had something to do with the way that we were parented. So
Yeah.
I think all of us listening would say, of course, I want my child to really develop into the social, emotional human being who gets it and slows down. But I think for so many of us, in that minute of chaos where our child is melting down and we're supposed to be climbing in the car, I think for so many of us, punishments do come out. So we say, okay, if you don't get in the car right now, I am taking away whatever it might be. Or that's it, I'm canceling the play date. Which, when we sit back and we actually take the time to think about it, it doesn't help the child to grow in any way. It just creates more division than connection.
Yep, completely. And my biggest thing with that is being prepared, right? So maybe that means I do one less thing in that day, right? I'm sort of over prepared in that way to ensure that if there is a meltdown, right, we have the time to sort of mediate that and talk about it, right? We're not rushed out the door, right? And I get it, right? Everyone has stuff to do, life, but that comes back to the way that we are bringing up our children, right? And that's this high stakes, high, like fast paced world in which you can't take a moment to ever slow down, right? And I fell in love. We went to Europe last year, and I fell in love with the Netherlands and sort of their parenting styles and their techniques and the way that they just really try to foster really good connections with their kids, right? And that is above all the most important, right? And even in restaurants and things like that, like children are openly welcome in a way that they're not welcome here, right? It's get a babysitter and go to dinner, right? Not bring your kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it starts at the ground level, right? How do you want to raise your child? And then what do you do from there, right? Because you only have 17, 18 summers with your kid, which seems to go by so fast.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so giving them the best chance possible at having a good, functioning, healthy life with good relationships, it doesn't seem to even compare to me to some of the, day-to-day things that we deem as important.
Absolutely. And I love what you're saying there is part of it is really just looking at our lifestyles and going, where can we cut back on the chaos a little bit? Is there an extracurricular activity that we can just check out the window? Because at the end of the day, it really is just about growing big, beautiful hearts. It's not about another skill and another skill and the rat race that we find
Mm-hmm.
ourselves in. From the time our kids are 3, 4, and 5, and there's competitive teams going for gymnastics and ninja and ballet, whatever it might be.
Oh, completely. I mean, it's one of those things that I've struggled with, right? I was a college athlete. Um, I played very competitively my whole life. And it's something that even I've had to grapple with, right? Is like what our child's life is going to look like and if he wants to choose those paths, right? And how I can sort of foster that good connection even when we're doing some of those rat race sort of things, right? And that's when it becomes the hardest, right? It's easy to be at home in our little bubble and sort of working on, those day-to-day things, but what happens when we're, running from here to there and back and forth? And I think that's the thing, right? Is we live in this society where perfectionism is expected. And so we have these children who are going from piano to soccer to school to this to that, right? And, private schools and this and that. And we have to do this and we have to be above the curve and we constantly have to, ace every test and do all of these things. And a lot of other countries don't even test children as early as we do. And that to me seems crazy because they're not behind, they're
Mm-hmm.
ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And they truly are. They're ahead. And we have the highest levels of anxiety and depression of any other country. And why?
Because it's too much. It's just too much.
Yeah, you can't possibly assume that someone's going to be able to keep up with it. And you're putting that on a child from day one.
As a norm, instead of as a
Yeah,
choice, it's a norm.
yep, yep. And so a lot of the things that I do in parenting are just slowing down,
Oh, that's
truly. And that's my favorite part is just slowing down. And it's okay.
mm. And a
Um,
beautiful gift to tell that to families. It's okay. It's okay to slow down.
yeah, yeah. Literally one of my favorite movies. It's a Pixar movie, and it's called Soul.
Oh,
Um,
it's beautiful.
yes, and towards the end, they're talking about purpose, right? And she's saying, just existing, right? Walking down the street. There was like a leaf that like fell in her hand, right? And that she was like, that's a purpose. And he's like, that's not a purpose. You like have to have all of these things, right? And to me, it was just one of those moments where I was like, that is your purpose, is to exist. Everything else is a bonus, right? Your job is to exist and to be happy.
No,
And
beautiful.
yeah, and if I can give that to my child, why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I give him a world in which he can exist and be happy and healthy and functioning and thriving, and then decide from there what he wants to do?
Absolutely. So that's foundational, and then we add the rest. The rest is the icing on the chocolate cake, but the chocolate cake,
Yes,
the
yes. You want
foundation.
to play sports, you want to do piano, you want to do whatever. Amazing, right? Those are your passions. Those are the things that you desire to do. That's great, right? And if you looked at my social media right now, you would happily say that like we've taken our child to like a batting cage and all of those things, right? So I'm not anti any of those things, right? It's just how do we bring them into our life in a way that isn't so much a priority and more so an added bonus.
Beautiful. Taylor, I have 2 final questions for you.
Yeah.
Favorite mindfulness technique that you use with your child? What is it?
The one that I just talked about, hands down. Intentionally stopping and paying attention, right? Slowing down, like, please. I can't even begin to express that enough. Like, go for a walk. Like, most of the time I find myself being like, man, I got so busy today that I didn't even have time to do some of the basic necessities for myself, right? Slow down. Some of the greatest gifts a child can give you is the ability to show you how to slow down, right? He comes inside from outside and he brings in a leaf or like this massive stick. And I'm like, at first I'm like, why do we have sticks in the house? But at the same time, he's so excited about it. And it's like, that's something that I never even think about on a day-to-day basis, right? Is what that tree is like outside, right? Or look at these plants, right? And he gives me so much of that every day.
Mm-hmm. And then favorite affirmation with him?
Oh, favorite affirmation. I would say I'm allowed to feel good. And I think that's what we lack as a society, is assuming it's okay to feel good. Everyone's always trying to climb that hypothetical ladder, and they're never just stopping to be like, I'm okay. It's okay. Life is okay, right? It's always what's next? What's on the agenda? What do we have to, I'm sure my list is probably 10 miles long, right? And when I get that done, I get it done.
It's beautiful.
I'm going to prioritize my own stuff first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Huge.
Yeah. I'm going to prioritize my family. I'm going to prioritize the lifestyle that I want to live, right? And a lot of really big CEOs and things like that, right? There are certainly a lot that overwork themselves and say they get up at 5 a.m. and don't go to bed till midnight or whatever. But there's a lot of females specifically that I've seen recently who don't check their phone till 10 a.m., go out of their way to actively ensure that they're doing the things they need to do for themselves and their family first, and then getting the job done, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can have both. There's no reason you can't. It's just prioritizing time and where you're putting your energy.
Love it. As an institution, actually at the Institute of Child Psychology, we instilled something which said absolutely no emails, no texts after 3 p.m. on a Friday until 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, because we were getting into this space where we were talking to families about balance and boundaries, and then suddenly we were all still working on the weekend, especially when it was a new company, and then we finally just sat down and said, what are our values here? And our values are family first, and if we're going to do that, then we have to live it.
Completely. And I'm totally a culprit of that, 1,000%. I'm like, I have to get this done or I have to get that done. And sometimes it's just being like, no, you know what? It's a Saturday morning. I need to spend time with my child, right? Or I need to go do this for myself, or I need to do that, right? And I think that's where we're really sort of falling off the map, right? Like, I have clients all the time who tell me, like, I was so overworked, but I don't know what to do about it. And yeah, it's a huge lifestyle change, right? It's huge. And I can take them part of the way, but until you really adapt that huge lifestyle change and understand that, like, your self-worth is not tied to achievements,
it's not going to go.
Yeah, we're not going to get anywhere, right? And I had to learn that the hard way, right? As I told you, I played sports for 20 years of my life. So achievements were very big, right? And I had to learn that my self-worth has nothing to do with my general achievements.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Taylor, any final words? This has just been the most beautiful podcast and a real reminder of what's important. But any final words you want to leave for our listeners?
Oh gosh. I would say just enjoy your kids. Enjoy them, really. I mean, they're such like little miracles and they're so great. And I know I'm like, and I promise you this doesn't change. This sort of like upbeat personality doesn't change. but really just enjoy them. Take the time to enjoy them. Your work is never, they're never going to give back to you. And something I think that really always resonated with me um, is I read a quote one day and it said, if you were gone tomorrow, your work would replace you the next day. And that's the
So
truth, but your family won't.
it's true.
And so
So
I've always prioritized family, and that's something that will not change. Immediately after this podcast, I guarantee you I'm going to go run and see my son for a few minutes.
love it. I love it. Taylor, where can our listeners find out more about you? Where can they find your beautiful book, Shavasana Sun? Where did they go?
Yeah. So on Amazon, or you can follow me on social media. So Instagram is Dr. Taylor Harper. I did actually just come out with a new book. I haven't even physically gotten a copy of it yet. Um, but it's sort of a series that's going to be coming out about our son. So we do a lot of cooking on Instagram, me and him. And so it's just sort of life lessons through cooking and things that he's sort of experienced. Um, and so I'm shifting a little bit, but still these very big life lessons that I think kids can take with them. So yeah, you can check me out on social media. Let me think. Like I said, Amazon. You can find Monster and Shavasana Sun on Amazon, which is great. They're both right there. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoys them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's go hug those babies.
Have a great day.
You too.